Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live event on social rights in the frame of the Porto agenda, organized by the Socialists and Democrats, the S&D. This is on a Facebook Live as well as on the website of S&D. This is looking ahead to the Social Summit in Porto on the 7th of May. And joining us in studio is Irache Garcia Perez, President of the Socialists and Democrats. Welcome.
Thank you.
As well as Agnes Jongerius, who is the S&D spokesperson for Employment and Social Affairs. Now, we know that, or many of us know, that there is an EU pillar on social rights. And that pillar, some believe that we're not moving fast enough, that there is an action plan, but that we need more action. There are too many working poor, especially with COVID. There's too little affordable housing. There are calls for an EU minimum wage, an EU child guarantee. We're talking about well-being, not only about jobs, quality jobs, but about well-being. How can we live better in the European Union? And we're not just talking about macro figures, we're talking about how we live. Should there be binding targets? That is going to be a big issue during that Porto summit of the European Union leaders. So I'd like to note the agenda today. There are opening remarks. There's also a panel on how to get from inequality to sustainable well-being with an MEP, civil society, NGOs, local government. There's also a panel on how to get from precariousness to quality jobs with an MEP, a researcher, and trade union representative. So a lot to talk about today. We'll also have closing remarks on how the Social Summit in Porto should address those issues. Tech tips. You can send in your questions via Facebook Live, also via Twitter. The Twitter hashtag is hashtag EU Social Summit 21. Speakers, please keep your comments brief if you can, your presentations brief, so we can get to some questions from the viewers as well. So let's begin with some opening comments by Irache, President of the S&D. You have also been in local government and provincial governments. You know the needs on the ground, and you can talk about that. This social summit, how far have we come on social issues? How much further should that social summit go?
Muchas gracias a todas y a todos.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. We're 2 weeks away from the Porto Social Summit, and now is the time to send a strong message to attempt to influence the process that will lead to a high-level commitment between the European institutions, the member states, and our social partners. It's the time to be bold and ambitious, the time to show that we've learned from this latest crisis. Over the crisis, the EU has demonstrated that the European project can be a powerful shield protecting the health and living conditions of its inhabitants. Thanks to our collective efforts, there was a fundamental shift in the European response to the COVID-19 crisis. And the policies that have been agreed on until now have been decisive in putting EU on the track to recovery. It's not the time to doubt. The EU can be an engine for solidarity and well-being of people, as well as the source of future prosperity shared by all. So this social summit is an opportunity to proclaim our political commitment, our commitment to sustainable well-being, equality, solidarity and social justice. This can be a turning point to put an end to inequality and ensure that environmental and digital transitions are fair and work for all. It's a time to guarantee that our recovery and resilience plans in the EU will put those who are most vulnerable at the forefront. And so the Prime Minister Antonio Costa, in addition to our political family, made the right decision to work for the European Pillar of Social Rights. And that's a message of hope at a time when people need it most, at a time when many have lost loved ones and friends because of the pandemic. Others have lost their jobs, their income, and they've been living through complete uncertainty. And that's why the Social Summit isn't an end in itself. It's going to be a historic milestone, the beginning of the implementation process of the 20 principles that make up the social pillar. So, the time is now. the time to implement a holistic strategy with a concrete action plan, with legal instruments and a political commitment at the highest level to bring this pillar about in 2030 and meet those aims. It's time to go from well-meant intentions to binding measures that will improve lives and improve society. With the work of our Commissioner Nicola Schmid, we've already put forward important proposals in the course of this term. For instance, the proposal of the Directive on minimum wage is an example of that. A clear message that the EU can't make the same mistakes as it has in the past. And we won't accept a recovery that's based on reducing our rights and salaries. It's also going to be important to explain to people how important this process is. Without the support of our citizens, this process will not be able to succeed. And people may not know what the social pillar is, but if we tell them that this is about improving their wages, their salaries, so that they can live a life with dignity, so that they have a right to affordable housing, it's about guaranteeing equality between men and women, and it's about guaranteeing wage equality as well, well, people will understand what the social pillar is. If we tell them that this is about supporting workers who are adapting to shifting job markets, they'll understand. It's about a youth guarantee to ensure that young people can get into the job market despite the difficulties that they're facing, and people will understand that. It's about putting an end to unpaid internships and precarious work. It's about giving free healthcare and education to young people and children. It's about fair and affordable housing, and people will understand that. If we're able to translate this project into concrete measures, the European Union will have a unique opportunity to regain the trust of its citizens. But this will only be possible, really possible, if we respond with a range of different instruments, so that we can have investment in public services, increasing jobs and reducing inequality. There needs to be a discussion around reforming tax laws and the need to put forward a proposal for a golden rule for social investment. It's necessary that we go back to our proposal of creating a real European unemployment tool that will enable us to address these issues. Having a more social Europe is also about the Commission, Council and Parliament prioritising people when it comes to making decisions in the context of the European semester, because social investment is a factor for productivity. The European semester shouldn't just be macroeconomic conditions, it's about our priorities when it comes to environmental sustainability and social issues as well. So this ought to be built on the different aims that have been put forward by the United Nations, as well as the European Social and the European Green Deal. And so the Porto Summit is the opportunity we need to achieve this ambitious agenda. Now, this isn't all going to happen in one fell swoop under the Portuguese presidency, but it's going to be a decisive step forward. It's about showing the way forward towards a European Union that's fairer and that works for everyone. You can certainly count on me in that way forward. Thank you.
The moment for a more social Europe. Let's drill down to that a bit more with Agnes as the spokesperson for Employment and Social Affairs. And you were co-rapporteur for the Minimum Wage Directive as well.
Yeah.
You're ex-president of the Dutch Trade Union, so you know very much on the ground how things go as well. What results would you like to see from this social summit? And let's give a few points on that.
I think it's clear that we can write history in Porto. I'm totally convinced of that. And I think it's also necessary to write history because in a way you can say European leaders learned the hard way that if you ignore your population, if you ignore the fact that people cannot make ends meet,
Right.
that...
Especially in this time of COVID, right? It's
in
gotten
time
even
of
worse.
process, but even before, I think you can say that the outcome of the Brexit referendum is a direct result of ignoring British people and British workers. So, where in the previous crisis, let's say in the banking crisis, the general solution was lower your minimum wage, lower your welfare state,
Right.
lower the level of collective bargaining. Luckily now we have seen also by Antonia Costa leading by example, by taking a different route than the ones which was the route formulated by the European level. And now when you can see he chose a different route. He raised his minimum wage, he protected his welfare system, and he got much better results in recovering from the banking crisis. And now Antonia Costa said, I put social issues on the top of my agenda. I think now we have the opportunity to indeed, after the Gothenburg summit, now write history with concrete results which really deliver for people.
Because Gothenburg was 2017, we're now 2021. That's 4 years later.
Yeah,
it's time to see more action then,
it's
right?
time to see more action, and I think, in a way, I think we can push for more action. There are already proposals on the table. You mentioned the minimum wage, which is important.
Okay.
We wrote a report in the European Parliament on a fair recovery. And there we said we need a directive for equal pay for men and women. We need elimination of in-work poverty.
Okay.
We need to work on the child guarantee because children will grow up in poverty. That's a bloody shame. I think we should not accept this in Europe. And we want indeed decent housing for all. And there you saw that Nicola Schmid came up with an action plan.
Okay.
And I think it's up to us now to push the Commission a little bit further.
Yeah, I think what's tricky is clear and binding targets that you would like to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? For instance, let's see, on raising quality employment, banning zero-hour contracts, a need to target to reduce poverty by half by 2030. You want that binding.
We want that binding because we think there is this new wind blowing. The old recipes are off the table, but now we have to guarantee that there is real progress. And I think, therefore, we need binding targets.
Okay.
And I also like to have a signature of all European leaders under this binding targets, because I think this is a common dream we have to work on.
Let's good. Let's hold that thought.
Yeah.
Because we got to move on. If I want to stay on time, I got to move on to Paul Nyrup Rasmussen. Paul, Mr. Rasmussen, Mr. Former Prime Minister, can you hear me? Are we connected? Or shall we move on and come back? Can someone tell me if Mr. Rasmussen is connected?
Yeah, he was.
There he is.
There he is.
There he is. Mr. Rasmussen is chair of the Independent Commission for Sustainable Equality, a former Danish prime minister, a former member of the European Parliament, and once a chief economist for the Danish Trade Union Council. Paul, can you hear me? I might also mention that as prime minister, you persuaded the Danes to approve the Maastricht Treaty after they rejected it. They voted it down. And somehow, as prime minister, you managed to find common ground among Danes to approve the Maastricht Treaty, which of course led to the euro and other integration of Europe. So you're a key figure, a key player in the building of Europe. Paul, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, you need to put that in my ear, control room, if you can.
Yeah.
I can,
Yes.
Okay. Because I don't. Oh, hold on a second. Hold on a second. I need to plug in. Tell me, and while I do that, if you can tell me your expectations of the social summit in Porto, having been a prime minister, having sat at that table with European leaders, what do you think we can achieve during that summit, during that social summit, as far as social issues?
Well, my advice will be, number one, that when you all as leaders are sitting around that table, don't only think at your own national situation, don't only think as a Northern European that you should only take care of your Northern welfare, but realize that the Southern European countries' welfare is as important as yours, in the sense that it's not only the capitalists and market economists and speculators on the financial markets who have to think across frontiers. It's the prime ministers and national elected parliaments and governments who have to do that. You see, my advice number one would be, it's not just about coming back to business as usual after the pandemic. It's about using the pandemic, the end of the pandemic crisis, to a new Europe. And when Europe is talking about a new Green Deal, I would say that Porto should tell the European Commission, please, when you talk about a Green Deal, talk about a social deal and a social pillar also. Because you cannot realize a Green Deal and a sustainable development without also making progress on the social pillar. These two things goes together. If you don't do that, it will be the poorer one in Europe who will pay for the Green Deal, and not everyone would say should.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, we saw the yellow vests in France. We could see more of them if we don't have a fair transition, if we don't have a fair Green Deal.
Yeah, right.
But I think that an important question during that summit, as we're kind of talking just now here, is that how much of this should be binding? And Agnes would like to see binding on zero-hour contracts, on reducing poverty by half in 2030, for instance. What would you like to see, and what do you think is feasible?
Number one, I think that Agnes' proposals are very realistic. And I think the proposals to become binding should be connected also to financial means and tools, which means that some poorer European countries can obtain these binding goals by a solidaristic financing through the European Commission. I think that's a very important point. Let me mention just two concrete examples. We all know that green transitions require us to switch to clean mobility. But mobility cannot only be obtained by taxes on petrol and diesel. You have to invest in clean public transport, and that is demanding investments. And that is why it is so important that the social pillar and sustainability must be financed together through our common European fundings. And the second point I would say is to redefine what our market economy is. I think that across the Atlantic Ocean, we can now work with a president who seems to have the same plan as we do. I mean, Joe Biden is, as Agnes and me, talking about minimum wages to increase. He's talking about fair economic development, massive investments in public means and public welfare. So we have got a new partner here also, which will have to be a good colleague when we as progressives are fighting for progressive development together with Costas at your summit.
And how can you make that argument for well-being? I mean, we can talk numbers, we can talk macro, but how do you make the argument of well-being to further this social pillar?
I think the argument of well-being has to do with being a competitive Europe also. We have never seen Europe being strongest when poverty was very, very widespread. When we had good growth, balanced growth, and more equal growth, we had higher competition across the Atlantic and the world. So you see, there's a direct link between fair social development and a strong social pillar on the one hand, and education and mobility and competitiveness on the other hand in Europe. So it's a sort of self-interest, which at the end of the day, the conservatives in the European Parliament should clap in their hands to do together with us when it comes to the point.
Paul, any final word from you before we move to the first panel? This has really been good, enlightening words of wisdom so far.
My point is, as you know, I recall when I was president of the European Socialist Party some years ago. And of course, at that time, there was disagreement from time to time among leaders because they found themselves in different national situations. But when we have been discussing sometime, we always ended up with a conclusion which was reasonably clear, that taking to regard our differences in the national situation, at the end of the day, every one of us understood that we could find some social progress together if we voted in the same direction and argued in the same direction. And I think Agnes' point, some of my points on collective transport, on investing in social housing, on combining growth with green and social justice are the key points to be made together.
I guess it's all about solidarity too, and that's an important aspect within the European Union. Paul, thank you so much. Paul Rasmussen, former Prime Minister of Denmark, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Let us move on to the first panel, from Inequalities to Sustainable Wellbeing. Remind you of the tech tips that you can send in your questions via the Facebook or the Twitter. Hashtag EU Social Summit 21. If you hear a good soundbite, please send it out. Please tweet like a beast. And let's keep an eye on time. I'm a little bit behind, but hopefully we can catch up with that. Klára Dobrev, let's start with Klára Dobrev, Vice President of the European Parliament, S&D member of the Employment and Social Affairs Committee. Klára, would you like to perhaps kick off this panel?
Yes, thank you very much. And I'll try to do the best in order to keep the time, because you were very good at it. So I'll try to do the same. And our first panel, as you already said, it's about inequalities and what are we going to do with it. And if I might say just a few words, because we have very interesting panelists, and I would like to leave the time for them, is that even before the COVID crisis, we were talking a lot among us in the S&D group that we have to learn from the past. After the big economic crisis in 2009 and 10, well, let's formulate it as it is. We failed. I mean, we Social Democrats failed. And in the same way, Europe failed. Because maybe if there were a huge improvement in figures, GDP growth, investments, you could put wonderful Excel sheets. But if I have to choose a word for the last 10 years with a consequent GDP growth and increase of the wealth of the European Union, if I have to choose a word for that, I would say unjust. Unjust because inequalities raise in the same time to an almost unbearable point. That in-work poverty is still an issue after 10 years of GDP growth. That homelessness is an issue after 10 years of GDP growth. That we could not do anything better for our Roma people in Europe, and we can go on and go on. So what we have to do now is that we have to be a game changers. And if I may say, we have done the first step, because the recovery package, what we have accepted in the Parliament and the Council about the COVID, it's a step in the right direction. But we now have to use the momentum. If we would like to have a just Europe, if we would like to have a Europe that really works for its people, and economy that works for people, just to quote von der Leyen, then it's a Social Democrat program. So I'm very happy that we are organizing the Porto Summit and looking forward. And that's why I would like to give the floor to our first speaker, Piotr Sadowski, who is going to be the panel rapporteur. He's the president of the Social Platform. And I would be very interested what he has to say to us about inequalities and how can well-being be sustainable in Europe. Piotr, are you here with us?
Hear me?
Ah, yes, we see you, Piotr. Okay, please go ahead.
As well. Perfect. Okay.
Yes.
So, Chris, thank you very much. Köszönöm, Klára. It's absolutely so important what you have just said. I think what you said about the fact that the one word, which is injustice, I cannot agree more with you. I completely agree that now is the time to act. And, you know, people in the European Union are asking to put social Europe at the center of the policy priorities. We can just look at the recent Eurobarometer on social Europe. It shows so clearly that people in Europe want the fight against poverty and social inequalities to be at the top of the agenda. And they really expect the EU and its member states to take an ambitious and a comprehensive action to really achieve a Europe which is socially just and inclusive for every single person. And when I say every single person, I'm not talking only about Europeans and holders of European passports. I'm talking about every single person who has made Europe their home. We, as European Union, are pulling together to fight for the social justice. And I think the social pillar is extremely unique, and it should be our guiding platform that we have in place. And if we really want to be the beacon of good practice and then practice what we preach, we need to be ambitious, and everyone must deliver the best they can to ensure that all the principles of the pillar really impact on the lives of all people living in Europe, and especially those who are really finding themselves in very vulnerable situations. So, Chris, a few days ago, you asked me for a story. So my story is that...
Yes, I would like to hear a story. That would be great. Yeah.
Okay, so my story is maybe a bit boring, but actually a social platform. We were in Gothenburg in 2017 as well.
Okay.
So since then, social platform and our members have really been pushing for the importance of social pillar and its great potential. And I think the great potential is our story. We really want to make it that, I talked about the beacon. We really want to make it that beacon of what Europe does for the people living in there. We have been calling for an action plan that sets ambitious targets and measures on EU level. And we've got some targets. We've got the action plan. Okay, it's only 3 principles that have been picked up, but they are important principles, and the targets are really important as well. So now we have the social summit coming up, and it's really important that this event is taking place. But of course, we as social platform have some important messages that we would like to send as well. So, for example, we should set more ambitious poverty reduction targets, which are in line with the SDGs, to halve them from the current levels. We need
The
to
Sustainable Development Goals of the UN, right?
exactly,
Yeah.
absolutely. We need to make the Porto Summit the starting point to build social Europe. We need an overarching strategy post-Europe 2020. We ask that the commitment to go beyond the actions proposed in the current action plan are particularly regarding minimum income are revised and reviewed regularly. And I think the importance of civil dialogue is really important as well. And then
that point is especially strong from you because your social platform
indeed
is the largest network of civil society organizations, 25 years old in Europe. You'd like to see more dialogue with your groups, right?
Absolutely. I think what is important from our approach is that we have the social dialogue, but we also have civil dialogue. And actually, we should all be stakeholders in this because we are one Europe together. So I think this is really important.
Another interesting point that I saw in some notes I got from you is that the Eurobarometer shows that Europeans want this too, right? Tell me about that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Eurobarometer that came up most recently is talking about so many people wanting to have social justice and social Europe ahead of it. And I am absolutely certain that is brought about the fact that we have been facing and living in the conditions of the pandemic. But I think the pandemic has shown that those inequalities which existed before, the pandemic has made them even stronger, and they became even more visible. Access to health, access to support. This is all so incredibly important. And we are human beings after all. We need to be looking after one another. And I think this is really, really important at this stage.
Yeah, that's the well-being argument. Piotr, dziękuję bardzo. Thank you very much. Let me move to, and hang on, please, stand by. Kate Pickett, expert on social inequalities and sustainable well-being, including gender. You're a professor of epidemiology and deputy director of the Center for Future Health. Let's talk about the challenges first, about the inequalities. What can you tell us about that?
Sure. Well, I could make a moral argument for inequality, and people have been doing that since the time of Plato. But really, as an epidemiologist, what I do is evidence-based medicine and evidence-based public health. And for about a decade now, the evidence has been growing, showing us that inequalities of income, of wealth, of power are bad for our societies. They're bad for the health and well-being of the public. They're bad for levels of trust. They're bad for the educational chances of children. They're bad for crime. They're bad for the environment. And this is all factual evidence, so it's not about moral arguments. And it shows that everything is connected. And if you can actually reduce inequalities between people, between countries, between groups of people, between nations, between neighborhoods, then you actually unleash an enormous amount of health and well-being and productivity and social trust and lots of social goods. And if we paid attention to this evidence about a decade ago, we would not have been as vulnerable to the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic as we have been. If you look at the countries that have done better through the pandemic, most of them have been led by women, but that's an aside. We can put that on aside. They've also been the more equal societies. They went into the pandemic with healthier, more resilient populations and with higher levels of social trust. And they were able to implement the necessary restrictions with the trust of their populations, and they've done well. So there's so many reasons why this recognition that inequality is at the heart of social progress and social justice. So many reasons why that recognition is important.
And Kate, you've said that there are different kinds of inequalities. There are vertical inequalities, which are income, wealth, power, and then there are horizontal inequalities, gender, ethnicity, disability, language. And when they intersect, they can either exacerbate each other or amplify each other.
Exactly. So if we've got vertical inequalities of wealth and power and income, they sort of press down across society. So it's always worse to be at the bottom of those things. But if you're also affected by the inequalities that are related to, say, being a woman in a man's world, or being a member of an ethnic minority, or having a disability, or not speaking the majority language in your country, then all of those disadvantages are exacerbated by the wealth and power and income inequalities. So if you are worried about gender inequality, you see that those get worse in a more vertically unequal society. So they're all connected.
They're all connected. And okay, and as far as solutions, you suggest floor targets. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so a floor target is saying it's not enough just to get the average up for a population or a nation or a region. You want to make sure that nobody's left behind below a particular floor. And that was the mistake that the Millennium Development Goals made. You know, you could do well as a country on the Millennium Development Goals if you just made things better on average, or for the people who were like perhaps the least poorest of the poor, just moving them above the margin. But if you really want to create sustainable well-being for everybody, then you need those floor targets. You say nobody is going to be allowed to fall below that floor.
And universal basic services, can you discuss that?
Sure. I mean, we're seeing that very much contained in the Porto Declaration when we're thinking about doing things for children, doing things around health services, housing services. The idea is that everybody should have access to basic services in education, in health, in childcare, in adult social care, in housing, transport, digital connectivity. Everybody needs to be able to access those at a basic level.
And to do that, you suggest building community-based hubs. Can you talk about that?
What I've been finding in my own work with communities and regions in the UK is that there are so many great ideas out there in communities about how you build wealth. Within a community, if you can support people to grow their own democratic economic initiatives like co-ops, mutuals, social community enterprises, and put together investment mechanisms to support them, people will create wealth locally and they will retain it locally. And that helps with the distribution of economic wealth and prosperity within areas. So it's not just we're not just seeing economic growth happening and benefiting those at the very top, but seeing it distributed more widely. So all of those forms of economic democracy are a really good investment in prosperity and productivity and well-being.
Points to keep in mind during the social summit in Porto. Stay with us, please. Kate, I want to move on, and if I can stay on time, to go to Anita Bay Bundegaard, Director and EU Representative of Save the Children Europe, which I saw quite active in different conflict zones myself. And at home, you're making sure that the EU fights child poverty in Europe. let's talk about that a little bit more, about fighting child poverty here in Europe, which is supposed to be one of the richest parts of the world.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes, it is. But still, we have a lot of poverty in Europe, and in particular, child poverty. And I think we've seen the EU actually being targeting poverty much more over the last few years, and obviously now for the Porto summit, this is coming onto the agenda again, which we are really keen to see, and with the social pillar as well. And even before the pandemic, we had 18 million children were growing up at risk of poverty and social inclusion in Europe, and we are absolutely sure that we will see that number increase, unfortunately, in the coming time, when we see the real consequences and implications of the pandemic. So that we actually now see an EU target that aims to lift at least 5 million children out of poverty by 2030 is historic, and we really welcome it. At the same time, we do believe that it is not ambitious enough, and as some of my panelists here have also been saying, we really need to set the targets to be aligned with the SDG targets by 2030, and therefore we would really like to see an increased ambition here to get more children out of poverty by 2030.
Because those children grow up. I think you've made the point that there is a vicious cycle of disadvantage from one generation to the next, right?
Yes, I mean, inequalities actually is passed on from one generation to the other. And children also, if children are poor, if they grow up in poverty, they also become poor when they become adults. So we actually see it following them throughout their life cycle, but also passing it on to the next generation. And therefore, we need to break that cycle. And one of the very positive initiatives that we've seen coming from this EU Commission, and which also the S&D group has been very active on and delivered on, is really the child guarantee. It's a proposal coming from the Commission now, but it is a very good proposal, and we've also told Commissioner Schmidt that he's been doing a really good job in presenting this proposal. Now is really up to the member states to adopt the child guarantee that sets out plans for how to tackle poverty at member state level. And therefore, we need their endorsement and their adoption of this child guarantee. And we really also want them to see commitments here, real commitments. Also countries that don't have maybe the largest rates of poverty. But what we see in Europe is really that all member states do have child poverty, and we need all of them to have action plans and to follow up on these plans to guarantee children a future without poverty.
Now, according to this action plan of the European Pillar of Social Rights, it wants to lift 5 million children out of poverty. And you're saying that's not enough? It's not enough.
It's not enough. I think we say that that number should be at least 9 million children. And as I think Piotr also said, it has to be in line with the UN 2030 agenda and the targets there. So we should at least aim for 9 million. So we hope that we can push together to make this happen at Porto or after. That doesn't matter as long as we get there.
Right. Okay. Anita, hang on, please. Thank you very much. Let me move on. And for those of you watching, please send in your questions through Facebook Live. Michela Kawa, coordinator of the EU Urban Agenda Housing Partnership and director of the Brussels Liaison Office of the City of Vienna. You represent Vienna in the Executive Committee of Eurocities, and you work closely also with COR, the Committee of the Regions. Michela, tell us about this, a little bit more about this housing action plan. That's principles 19 and 20 on that action plan. Tell us a little bit more about that. Does it go far enough? Do you want to see that binding?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the invitation. I hope you can hear me.
Sure do.
That's good. Yeah, I listened very carefully to all the speakers before, and I think that when we look at housing in the action plan of the European Pillar of Social Rights, there is obviously potential, but there is also room to improve. So what we have assessed, and this is a partnership of cities, European stakeholders like the International Union of Tenants or Housing Europe. So really many people who have been working on solutions for the deep housing crisis we face in Europe since many years now. We see this action plan really falling a bit short. It could do better to deliver more on housing, especially in times of the pandemic. We have seen that the housing crisis that we experienced way and years before has been aggravated by the pandemic. So it's necessary more than ever to deliver better on decent, safe, adequate and accessible and affordable housing for all on European level. And the EU could do more. And the action plan of the European Pillar of Social Rights could really deliver also a bit more on that.
Now, I know that Committee of the Regions, it doesn't have direct power, but it is very important in helping to mobilize on a local and regional level to try to get certain objectives of the EU done. And regarding housing, I guess you play an important role there. Can you give us an example on the ground there in Vienna, how you're able to perhaps improve the housing situation?
I think that Vienna is always a very bad example because it's such a good example.
Oh, oops.
With regard to housing, no, it's not being like a little bit, proud, but in fact, what we see in Vienna, that to do good housing policy, you need a whole basket of different instruments, and some of them are really to be delivered and can be designed and managed on local level, like zoning laws, for instance, that allow for more affordable housing. Some have to be done by the national level. This we have seen with the rent regulations, and especially now with the wave of eviction coming on to European citizens in the aftermath of the pandemic. That's really a problem, but that's often the national level. And then we have EU regulations and EU opportunities to improve the overall housing situation. And there we're going into clearly issues of state aid, issues of the European semester, deblocking investment, better use of funds, these kind of things. So there's always different levels of governance and different instruments that can be used to design, I would say, what is a sustainable and protective housing system.
And let's talk about another aspect that's very much dear to your heart, I think, is the female face of energy poverty. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I think it was a very good point that was made by Kate about the inequalities and the gender dimension of inequalities in general. And here we clearly see, if we talk about housing affordability, we have to assess that affordability is always a relation between income and costs. So clearly there is a gender dimension to that, and also in housing affordability, but it's even more so the case for energy. And what we really feel is that the EU currently still fails to assess that there is a gender dimension in energy poverty because they don't even gather the data. So looking into issues of poverty in this context, energy poverty with relation to housing affordability is really, really important.
But then I think you've said too that you want to see that female face in the solution, that women should be part of the policy making, of the action, taking action. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know from data that only 16% of all mayors' offices are held by women. But it's obviously clear that we need to do something on the level of political representation as well. But really doing better on data and looking more into the evidence of the gender dimension of inequality is something that where we need the EU also to do more. And what I think when you talk about women being part of the solution, it's also this new renovation wave in the Green Deal. I think Paul Rasmussen has mentioned it. Here, there is a clear participatory and inclusive approach. But again, I don't see that there is a clear commitment to account for gender and diversity in the participation of people and citizens in this whole exciting and ambitious project.
Because I think
part of the solution also when it comes to design their local environment, their neighborhood, everything.
Yeah. To design, manage, and take ownership of their neighborhoods and cities. It's an important aspect there. Very interesting. By the way, I do love what Hundertwasser, the artist Hundertwasser, did in his house in Vienna. It's fantastic. People should see that. More people should see that.
And it's a municipal housing.
Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah. Exactly.
It's not
well, there.
It's municipal.
Zum Beispiel. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Michaela, thanks. And hold on, because I hope we'll get some questions in for you. Let's move to our final speaker on the panel is Inma Vasquez of Médecins Sans Frontières, representative to the EU for MSF. And there's another organization that I saw in very difficult conflict situations. And sometimes your group was the last one there. You had the last flag flying in some places that I've been to. You've been active in Angola, Sudan, South Sudan, Nigeria, and so on, natural disasters as well. And Europe has become a disaster as well with COVID. And can you talk about that, how MSF jumped to action to deal with a situation here?
Yeah, one thing, someone is playing the presentation. I don't need that if they can switch it off. I don't know who is putting. Can you see it? Well,
I can see it. Yeah, go ahead.
Just no, but they can take it out.
Okay. All right.
Yes. So yeah, thank you very, very much for inviting us. I mean, we are just a medical humanitarian organization, and as you were saying, normally we don't work in Europe and we don't respond to epidemics in Europe.
No, exactly. So, I was surprised to find out that you actually were active in Europe. That to me indicates how grave the situation is.
But also we have to take this very humbly as well, because that I will explain. So there are two aspects that are important, and one of them is the one that is really connected to the discussion that you are having now. At the beginning, it was just almost a coincidence because we are based in Europe. We have 5 operational sections of MSF working in Europe. We had a lot of people on standby. We call it on standby. It's people that could not go to the field because there were restrictions for European citizens because of COVID. So we said, well, these people is here. What we should look. We should talk to the ministries of health and so on. So that's what we did. We started in Italy. We went to the north, and then we saw the needs. And what we did at the beginning, it was very humble, but it was based on our field experience, which were very practical aspects of what we call infection prevention and control. So we were involved in organizing at the beginning of some of the triage, what we call outside the hospitals with the tents, the special washing hands facilities, the circuits, and all this. So we were not doing the medical treatment as such because there is critical capacity here, but we were on practical aspects advising, providing our advice, humbly. But then very quickly we saw, and this is the connection, that there were very acute needs with vulnerable groups. And here we touch upon not just a problem of capacity, but also a problem of political will and discrimination and inequalities, which is the ones that we think is worth here. So
what would you like to see, Inma, in this summit, this social summit? How do we address that? You saw problems on the ground, and you just mentioned those. How should the social summit deal with that?
Okay. I think, well, I will raise two issues. I'm sure there are many more, but out of our competence. So I think our work, one of the key of the issues that we work more with was with the nursing homes. So we think that the problems we saw there, and it's not just us, it is already there, and there is a lot of information about the situation in the nursing homes. We think they need to be addressed more broadly with concrete recommendations to avoid this to happen again. We think maybe the accountability issues need to be discussed as well in the summit. The data, the transparency on the data of what was happening in the nursing homes, but also just the basic protocols that were not there, the lack of training, the lack of resourcing of the staff in these nursing homes system or in the home base of home care system. Psychological support, I think, is something very important to also consider more broadly, not for the staff and for the people in these homes. Protocols. We saw also a lot of dilemmas that are already known and ethical dilemmas regarding the medical referrals of the older people that were in these nursing homes, also of isolation versus dignified treatment, palliative care, end of life treatment. Or these are very medical issues, but they are not. No, I would say they are medical and beyond, and they require protocols. They require transparency and action. That's for the nursing homes.
And you'd like to see migrants and refugees somehow included in national and global response plans to COVID-19. Could you say a bit more about that?
So yes, so this is the point. The second bulk of our work was with migrants and refugees, and here there is something that is very important for us to say. We saw, and this is very sad to see in Europe, is the use of COVID as an excuse to discriminate further this group of people. So this, we think, is very clear. There are very clear examples all over Europe. For example, one of them was the mass quarantines that were applied in camps in Greece with no respect of any of the guidelines, including the European ones, that were much beyond that the lockdowns regulations for the normal population. They were more strict and longer in the time. There is a lot of pressure on also something very sad in Europe that we think we should discuss much further, which is the obstacles to the work of the NGOs. I mean, and even further, the criminalization of our work when we are supporting this migrants and refugees population. So we saw, for example, a COVID center of NHS working in Lesbos that was closed. Was forced to close by administrative reasons. Then there was nothing to replace it. For example, also the fact that we could not disembark. There were the restrictions to disembark the people in the search and rescue vessels, but there were no restrictions for disembarkation of other vessels. And also the quarantine that was imposed to people. I mean, so it's a way to marginalize the migrants and refugees further, and it's a way of portraying these people as a threat for the health of the European population, which we think is incorrect. I mean, apart from the moral, but it's also medically speaking, of public health speaking, is incorrect, and is
it must have been shocking to your teams who work in other places, and they come to Europe and they say, "My gosh, this is shocking that this should happen here." But in any case, thank you so much, Inma. Hang on, because we've got questions in. Here's one from Twitter. What measures do you plan to take to promote social mobility? Let me pass this to Agnes to answer. This is from Pepa Calderon, who's asking.
I think it's a good question, and it's also underlining the fact that while the Commission is now pushing for employment targets or unemployment targets, I think from our side we should say we don't want any job, we want good jobs, and has already been addressed by the colleague of Save the Children, or by Kate Packett. we need thresholds of decency in Europe for income, but also a threshold of decency for jobs. And
there's a hashtag for thresholds of decency.
I think this is important. I think we should push for that. And let me say, by pushing for a threshold of decency for income and for jobs, we also are able to address this issue which Médecins Sans Frontières. So I saw in a lot of member states also horrible conditions of labor migrants coming from, for instance, Eastern Europe, where the same is true. They're coming from Romania, so they are the ones spreading the COVID in our meat slaughterhouses, which is, of course, totally nonsense. Also here, I think we need thresholds of decency. I think if the Porto summit is giving us a signature on the thresholds of decency on all kinds of targets, I would be happy.
Okay, so those of you watching, listening, hashtag EU Social Summit 21, and Agnes is calling for thresholds of decency. Anyone else would like to comment? Perhaps Kate, because Kate, you did talk about this, about mobility, I believe. Kate, would you like to chime in on this? If she's still with us.
Yeah, if you want to improve social mobility, then you must tackle inequality. The evidence shows that the countries with the greatest social mobility are those with the least income inequality. So we often joke that, if you want to live the American dream, you should probably go to Finland, because you've got far more chance of transcending your family social class of origin in the Scandinavian countries than you do in the United States. But this thing about thresholds of decency, it's really crucial. It's really crucial for the well-being of the population. I'd really like to see any politicians to point the finger at, or it's those people coming over here spreading COVID and working in our meat processing factory. Well, let them go and work in the meat processing factories instead then, and see what their chances are of contracting COVID in cold conditions, in crowded places. Decent work, decent housing, decent incomes. These are the things that underpin people's productivity, but also their liberty to protect their own health and well-being in the face of a shock like the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, let me move on to another question, if we can get a few more in. This is Freek Spinuin asking on Facebook, does S&D support a call for a poverty sub-target to end homelessness by 2030 in line with the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals? Agnes, perhaps, would that be for you to answer?
I think so. And I think Freek knows, I know him, and he knows that we are supportive of this. I think indeed it's clear that we need to really attack homelessness. I think it's a bloody shame that in this richest country continent of the world, we have a rise of homelessness. Clara also already mentioned this, and so I think we need to have a plan to attack homelessness. We need a plan also to push for more affordable housing, because I think these are connected. And Michaela showed the way. I think, luckily, some local communities, some local mayors, some local communities are taking the lead, while some member states at the national level are still hesitant. So let's see, let's learn from the good examples and indeed ensure access to decent housing for anyone, also those who don't have a roof over their head at all.
I also got something from Freek saying that homelessness is not measured by Eurostat. Is that right? And is not part of the social scoreboard that will monitor progress on the social rights pillar.
Yeah, but here I think, I hope Freek and I agree, that we need to reform the scoreboard, because I think the problem now is that we have that many targets, and none of them are really binding. So the change we are trying to push for, can we limit the number of targets, but make them binding, and make national governments, local governments, social partners, and not in the housing issue, but make everyone responsible for delivering upon this binding target.
On homelessness, maybe we should tap Michaela on this as coordinator of the EU Urban Agenda Housing Partnership. Michaela, can you add to that?
Yeah, I think it's vital what Agnes said, that we really have to improve the social scoreboard on many issues with relation to housing and homelessness. But we should also not forget that we need to have the subnational level on that. Otherwise, this will not give the whole picture. So really include the subnational dimension into inequality, of inequality patterns will allow for better and more informed policy development.
Okay. Can I go back to Piotr? Piotr, are you with us? Piotr? Can you hear us? Are you connected with us? Okay, let me move on while we wait for him. Lucia Mellado Calderon.
He was there.
On Twitter. Piotr, are you with us? Okay. Let's move to Lucia. On Twitter, she's in Spain. The far-right Vox is using an electoral poster that criminalizes unaccompanied minors that arrive to Spain. Do you think there should be an EU-wide policy that criminalizes these types of hate crimes? Who would like to comment on that, on minors, perhaps Save the Children? Anita, are you with us? Anita Bay Bundergau.
I find it hard to actually come with a very clear statement on something I haven't seen, and I think where do we have actually freedom of expression, versus children's rights here? So I find it obviously utterly unacceptable that this is happening, that children are being targeted in such a way by political parties. Children have their own rights. They do have they need protection. They don't need to be victims of political propaganda. And I think that's what I think we should agree on. And then, I believe that many in politicians will also agree with me here. And hopefully, this is a smaller group.
Okay, all right. I think I would like to get to some closing comments a little bit early because the next panel is going to be quite heavy. From what I can see. So if we can get some closing comments. Klara Dobrev, if you're connected, Vice President of the European Parliament,
yes.
Can you give us some wrap-up comments on this very, very important storytelling that we heard in this past hour?
Definitely. It was a very interesting panel. So you tell me how many minutes I have, because I could go on and talk about it for hours.
Well, I'll give you a couple minutes. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. And it was very interesting to hear from our partners, social partners, civil organization, the importance of social investment. We have heard about children, about housing, about social equality, about inequality, about gender issues, and so on. So this is so important. And some of you, I think Piotr and Kate already touched on an issue that in the past decades, we were talking about social investment and social issues a little bit from a moral point of view. And let me be a game changer a little in this aspect as well, as I promised at the very beginning. We are hearing from our fellow friends in the European Parliament so many times, from the Conservatives, from the Liberals, from the New that, okay, but your policy of social investment, spending so much money on healthcare and education and housing and childcare and so on, but it will not help us to build a competitive, economically competitive Europe. And I would like to say that is so bad and it's so wrong as you cannot imagine. Because what does competitiveness mean in the 21st century? It's not about steel and coal anymore. We are really another union and another phase of mankind. To be competitive, it means that you have very clever, very healthy people. Who would dare that in labor market to be innovative, to find out new issues? You need definitely a labor which is healthy. You need a labor which is educated. And you need a labor, how should I formulate it, in a broad sense, happy. I mean, free from anxiety, which can ruin one's day, from housing to education, from living cost inflation or whatever. This makes it competitive. And yes, to be competitive, you have to invest in social issues. So when we are talking, and when we are going to talk in the Porto Summit about our social Europe, about strengthen and make mandatory regulations for this kind of new Europe, then we are talking about a much more competitive, economically competitive Europe as well. So this is something which should be, well, let's say not a game changer, a brain changer, or a change in the thinking of many people around us. And the second comment is, you would allow me as a politician to see and to be a little bit afraid of the growing strength of the far right in Europe, but not only in Europe. We have seen it in the past years from America to Great Britain in the European Union as well. And far right and populists are the ones who are raising sometimes the good questions, but giving terribly wrong answers to that. And our task is to be quicker and to be more effective in raising and answering those questions. The fear of an ordinary European people. I don't know who, maybe I'm just thinking that maybe Anita mentioned, and she talked about the possibility or the problem of how people are dreaming about the American dream and what is the reality. For example, the social mobility. And if we cannot give our people a dream, if we cannot give them a belief that they'll have a little bit easier life, that their children are going to have a little bit easier life, that's what social mobility is about, then we are just pushing European people and European voters in the hands, or part of them in the hands of the far right. It's our political responsibility as well. So not only economic responsibility, it's a political responsibility. And of course, we are people, I mean, mankind should build a just society. And this is our moral responsibility. And I'm definitely sure that the S&D group in the European Parliament does understand this task and this responsibility for the future. And I cannot be more happier for the Porto Summit and for the preparation and the topics what we are bringing there. And I should assure everyone, this century, this 10 years, the next 10 years are going to be the 10 years of the social democracy in Europe. Because this program, what we started, is a social democrat program, and we should really lead it. Thank you.
Clara, thank you so much. Can we get some final comments from Piotr, actually? Piotr as well, of the president of the Social Platform. Are you with us now, Piotr? Can you hear us, Piotr? In the meantime, I have one question left. And if I could ask you, Agnes, having been in the trade unions, regarding decency standards, this is from Lada Cancelar. Regarding decency standards for work, I would like to see binding quality standards for every job created with EU subsidy in that recovery period. Is this something that we could envisage?
I think this is a very good point. And I think we can do it throughout what we call at the European level public procurement rules.
Strings attached to the procurement contract.
So
right?
you get your funding, but we have conditions attached. And now you see that the public procurement rules are under revision. Because people say, yeah, but we need to include the climate targets from the Paris Agreement.
And that's fair.
And that's fair.
Okay.
So
but
that's,
also quality of work.
This is why I think if the rules are already on the revision and we have binding targets, let's include that also in the public procurement rules. We are now having the fight, for instance, on the subsidies for agriculture.
Okay.
And it's a lot of money. And the cap.
Agricultural policy.
There's a lot of money involved. Let's have social conditionality there too. So I think
for farm workers.
For farm workers, but indeed, people are now quite easily talking about let's leave no one behind. This is the new buzzword here in Brussels.
Let's make it real.
Let's make it real. So let's have social conditionality attached to funding from the European level. Very good idea.
Yeah, I meant to hold back on that question because the next panel is on labor and work, but I thought I'd pop that now. Piotr, are you back with us now? I just want to make one more try before we go to the next panel so we can stay on time. And you're welcome to join us a little bit later if you have to. Let's move to the next panel to stay on time. From precariousness to quality jobs and fair mobility. And my tech tips, once again, your questions to Facebook Live or you're on Twitter. And the hashtag is hashtag EU Social Summit 21 as we look ahead to the Social Summit in Porto on the 7th of May. And that's what this is all about. Let's go first to Elisabetta Gualmini, the S&D member of the Employment and Social Affairs Committee on platform work. Elisabetta, please give us some opening comments on platform work. What do we need to see from the Social Summit?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. I hope you can hear me. Okay.
Yeah, perfettamente. Sì.
Bene, molto bene. I also say hi to Agnes, and yes, I think that the precariousness of jobs, or maybe the quality of jobs, is really the challenge of our social summit and of course of our social agenda, because quality of jobs means quality of life. If you want to to build up a family or to raise kids or to make your dreams come true, at least at the basic level, you have to have decent working conditions and decent jobs. So in Europe, we have more than 10% of workers at risk of poverty. We have 2.5 precarious workers, so we have to tackle this challenge. And of course, the pandemic has, radicalized, strengthened the differences, the gaps between the protected workers and the unprotected ones, between the insiders and the outsiders, between the young and the old, the women and and men, between the public sector and the private one. So we need a new social contract, to keep together all the segments of the labor market. And many scholars, many also colleagues of mine, when I was at the university, speak of the age of anger or of angrynomics. That is, of course, people are getting more and more angry because if they do not see their, expectations fulfilled, of course they get angry. And we know that a fair wage and a decent job are minimum expectations for everyone. So now I think that Next Generation EU has already marked a good step forward because basically it is a paradigm change. We have vocational training in it, long life learning. We have, the promotion and encouragement of good quality works and jobs. So this is a very important, starting point for all the member states. But of course, the implementation of the social pillar is the other side of the coin. And I have to say that the Commission has already made some important steps because, the directive on the minimum wage, Agnes is our co-rapporteur, and so she has already told us something about it, is will be absolutely important for decent working conditions. Then platform workers, of course, we need a stronger social protection, especially for low-skilled platform workers, for deliveries or food riders, who in many countries are also foreign people who eventually do not speak even the language of the country in which they work. So we have to regulate also this kind of new jobs. And then the directive on pay transparency is another, and on pay equality is another important step. So I think we are in a good direction. From a concrete perspective, I think also that we need efficient job agencies, employment services in order to promote a good quality, and finally the involvement of the social partners. And the state alone cannot create or invent new good quality jobs. We need the effort and the energies of many institutions, and this is what a new social contract means. So I'm looking forward to listen to the presentations of our contributors and panelists.
Great. Grazie tanto, Elisabetta. I hope to come back to you. Let's move to Per Hilmersson, who's Deputy General Secretary of the European Trade Union Confederation, ETUC. 45 million members from EU trade union organizations in 38 European countries. Per, are you with us?
Indeed, yes, I am. Thank you very much. And thanks for the invitation. The EGC will be there in Porto, working and pushing for a more social Europe. And I think, it's very timely, this summit and the webinar today, because we are faced with huge challenges on the labor market and huge challenges for our members. The pandemic has shown how fragile our labor markets are, and how huge inequalities exist in terms of job security and opportunities at the labor market. It's the people with precarious jobs that lose them first in times of crisis. We've seen it now. We saw it already at the financial crisis a decade ago, and it affects in particular the young people and women. I believe that the role of the EU has also been very important. We see how important it is that we have a united front in Europe and that we face the challenges together, because I believe the unemployment in Europe would have been far more dramatic if there hadn't been emergency measures in place by member states supported by the EU through this shore mechanism, for instance. But there is a risk that we are still facing an unemployment crisis. So member states and the EU needs to continue with the emergency support measures until we have a real economic recovery and employment has stabilized. And of course, these measures need to cover all workers, including the precarious ones and non-standard and self-employed, because they have so far, unfortunately, falling outside these measures, with severe economic and social consequences, not only for the individuals but also for the society. As been said before, inequalities creates unequal societies.
Yeah,
it's bad for society. Yeah.
So Per, what would you like to see concretely come out of this social summit that would improve the quality of work?
Well, there is a need for a European agenda on quality jobs based on gender equality, decent wages, adequate social protection, health and safety, active labor market policies, education and skills and training. and bargaining rights. And this agenda is the European Pillar of Social Rights. It's all in there. So, but what we need is it needs to be implemented properly, and that's a joint responsibility of the EU institutions, of member states, regions, and social partners. And that's what we have to push for in Porto. We have to sign up to, stop talking about it. Now we need to see concrete results.
Yeah, 4 years after Gothenburg, where are we now? But what would you like to see binding? What do you think is realistic to ask to be? We can't make all these things binding, can we? Or can we?
Well, I think that's a question also for the conference on the future of Europe. What is the role of the EU? What competence, as you talk about, what can the EU do in terms of legislation? I think to implement the social pillar, it's a mix, a mix of actions and measures and of actors in different levels. Mm-hmm. So we need to agree on who does what. But the EU has a very important role. I mean, it can legislate on occupational safety and health. It can legislate on working conditions, on fair mobility, on working and living conditions, on accommodation. So we have a long list of proposals for this, which we hope the Porto Summit can agree on.
Okay, Per, hang on. Let me move to Barbara Gelstenbelge, expert on job quality, European Foundation for Improving Living and Working Conditions. That's Eurofound. That's an EU research agency. You're senior research officer in the You were senior research officer in the European Metal Workers Federation in the 90s, which I think is quite interesting because that sector was in transition, and you were there looking at the economics of how to get through that transition, which turned to, I believe, specialty steel in many parts of Europe to try to survive. But anyway, I mean, we're talking about adaptation, right? About trying to adapt jobs to today and to the future. So let me hand it to you. I mean, how do we get from precarious jobs to quality jobs in these digital times?
Thank you very much, Chris. I think it's important to base a debate on policies and what needs to be done on facts and figures, and to define the concepts that we're talking about. So this afternoon, at the center, we have this term quality jobs. So the question is, what is a quality job? What constitutes a good job? And I think it's quite clear that it is not only just one aspect. Can we go to the next slide, please? So job quality is clearly multidimensional. At Eurofound, in our concept, we distinguish 7 dimensions of job quality, which on the one hand makes it very complex to measure job quality, but it also means that we have a wide range of levers to improve job quality. And this complexity, I think, Agnes, is also important if we do want to move towards a threshold of decency. It's all these aspects that you see on the slide that need to be taken into account when we talk about job quality. Next slide, please. These dimensions, these 7 dimensions of job quality cluster together in what we call job quality profiles. So if you look at jobs in Europe overall, you can distinguish these 5 groups that you see on the slides. Now, some score high on some dimensions and not so good on others. There's room for improvement in all of them. But the main concern is that 1 in 5 jobs, 19% of jobs in Europe, are of poor quality. That means they score low in all 7 dimensions. Many of these jobs are precarious and they are not sustainable, which means that workers in these types of jobs will not be able or will not be willing to continue working until retirement. And if you keep in mind the target now in the action plan of 78% employment rate, we're not going to get there if 1/5 of the jobs in Europe are of poor quality. Next slide, please. Of course, it's a question whether employment status, are you in a standard employment relationship or in a non-standard employment relationship? Does that make a difference for job quality? And the clear answer to that question is yes, it does. Can we go to the next slide, please? And especially for the dimensions of skills and discretion and prospects do we see a big difference between those in non-standard employment and those in permanent contracts. And that's important, especially for this skills and discretion dimension, because one aspect of this is access to paid training. Can we go to the next slide, please? And what you see here is actually a quite worrying picture. On the one hand, maybe not surprisingly, you see that there is a difference between those on a permanent contract and those on a fixed term contract, and also for those on full-time employment versus those on part-time employment with regard to access to training. But the worrying thing is the gap is widening and not closing. So if up and reskilling, as we know, is required in the context of the twin transition, that depends on training and on the job learning, then this development is really, really worrying. And again, in connection with the target, 60% of Europeans participating annually in training, we obviously have a problem. I will skip the next slide because I want to say something. Yeah, we can skip this. I want to say something about a new form of non-standard employment that was mentioned before, and it is very much at the center of the debate: platform work. Now, platform work, first, the definition, to be clear that what we are talking about, it's the matching of supply and demand for paid labor through an online platform. And right now, this is a marginal phenomenon in European labor markets. Current best estimates are that only 1 or 2% of Europeans are doing this form of work as their main job. But with increasing digitalization, this is likely to change. And one of the burning questions around platform work is, what is the status of platform workers? And we have, on the one hand, platforms saying, well, these are independent contractors. And on the other hand, we have many platform workers saying, but it's the platform that decides where we work, and when the platform monitors performance, there is a clear subordination relationship. So finding an answer to this question, self-employed or not so self-employed, requires a look at different types of platform work. That's very important. If you go to the next slide, you have information of just 5 of very common types of platform work in the EU. And the key distinguishing factor to decide this question, self-employed or not so self-employed, is who assigns the task. Is it the platform supported by an algorithm, or is it the client or the worker? And depending how this question is answered, can we move to the next slide, please? Depending on how this question is answered, we could be directing our efforts towards establishing a default employment status by type of platform work. For example, employee for workers hired by platforms, and self-employed for workers using the platform as an intermediary. And that would lead to a situation where we, on the one hand, acknowledge that the plumber who uses the platform to get new clients is in a very different situation from the food delivery driver who waits for his next task on the smartphone. If I have a little bit more time, 2 more minutes, I would also like to say something about not a new form of employment, but a shift in work organization.
Sure, Barbara, go ahead. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. A change in work organization, and we are talking here, of course, about telework, remote working. So almost half of workers in the EU were teleworking either all of the time or part of the time in July 2020, as a result, of course, of the pandemic and associated restrictions. Before, it was below 5%, huge difference between pre-pandemic and pandemic times. If you look at this slide here, the graph, it is clear that a vast majority of workers would like to continue to work from home, not necessarily all the time, but several times a week or a month. 2/3 of workers want this. Why? Well, it is the flexibility. It's the
flexibility, yeah, that's right.
And autonomy that workers like. But if we look at the next slide, there are also problematic implications of working from home. And you can see this here. It is about working during free time. And in July of 2020, according to our survey, 50% of workers working from home exclusively were working during their free time. And 20% of them were doing so either every day or every other day. So this is also not what you call a pandemic blip. We did see that when we examined remote working before the crisis, that workers that are not working from the employer's premises are much more likely to work in their free time, to work longer hours, to not get the 11-hour required rest period. Why do they engage in this informal and therefore also unpaid overtime? It is because of increased work intensity. So workload, permanent connectivity, email overload, regular interruptions, and also the perceived need to prove that I am as productive at home as I am in the office. And that leads to this increased pressure to perform.
Right. So you're saying that that should be an important aspect to look at during the summit in Porto?
Exactly, because that's where the right to disconnect comes in.
Right to disconnect, exactly.
Exactly. And we have just recently looked at a series of case studies in companies that have the right to disconnect. How is this actually implemented? And you can imagine there are very different approaches. But one thing is very common in all these examples. It is that a balance needs to be found between the flexibility that teleworkers want and this prevention of overconnectedness, which in a way seems to be almost automatically associated with the increased flexibility of telework. So if we go to my last slide, please, then that is just a list of
okay.
Next one. No, next one here. Next one, please. Looking at the research. Next slide, please. Looking at the research, we would see policy priorities on the one hand in monitoring of trends in job quality across these different dimensions to identify the need for intervention. Second point, employment status and job quality. There is a link, and the disadvantages of non-standard jobs in skills development and career prospects do risk leaving people behind in the twin transition. That needs to be addressed. Clarify the responsibilities of platforms towards the people who work for them, point number 3. And last point, ensure that the flexibility of remote working does not lead automatically to increases in work intensity and overconnectedness. Those would be the points. Thank you.
Okay, Barbara, thank you so much for those points. Let's turn to Oliver Rüttig, the Regional Secretary of the European Services Workers Union. That's Uni Europa with 7 million workers. You represent retail, wholesale, finance, hairdressers, graphics, packaging, temp workers. Nice to see you. Nice to see you, Oliver. Are you? Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you okay. I hope you can hear me as well.
Yes, yes, I do. I mean, what Barbara just said is quite interesting. It impinges on quite a few of the people that you represent, right?
Indeed. I mean, when we look at digitalization and COVID-19, really, it is us, the services workers, who are really on the front line as well as in the back office. But I mean, the issue is really for the frontline workers. What can we do? And I think when we look at the future, all the changes that had happened in industry in the last 50 years are now really focused on the services sectors, from low-skilled job to really high-skilled jobs. And that is about precarious jobs. And there, indeed, we want to see, and that is a key target for Europe, for the S&D and also for the European social pillar. How do we make that we have quality jobs and leaving precarious jobs behind?
So how do we, what would you like to see them agree on in Porto, concretely?
Well, I mean, the first question is, of course, what are we actually talking about? And the answer is simple. What we're looking for is working life should allow workers and their families to live in dignity. Now it gets a bit more complicated. This requires, on the one hand, an individual dimension. This is decent pay and working condition, employment security, a career perspective, and freedom from fear of not managing and falling behind. It also requires a collective dimension, and that is too often forgotten. That is the ability of workers to shape their own working lives collectively, to have a say in their workplace. My strong belief, our strong belief, is that without sectoral collective bargaining, we cannot achieve quality jobs and a fair society. Today, collective bargaining is in jeopardy. It is declining in most countries. We need a joint effort, and that is really what the social pillar should be about. We need a joint effort by the social partners, government, society, to reinforce collective bargaining. The EP showed the way in December by setting a target of reaching 90% collective bargaining coverage by 2030. However, a target is not enough. When we look at the European social pillar, it's there. It's a pillar, but we have to make it actually making a difference.
And we so need you want to see it binding. You'd like to see something like that
I want to have it binding, and I want that we really have concrete actions to really strengthen collective bargaining, and not only at the level of the member states, but of the EU itself.
Now, I see you also represent temp workers. That's probably the most difficult thing to organize and to guarantee their rights, isn't it?
I mean, with temporary agency workers, we actually managed 20 years ago. We came together with our counterparts on the side of the employers and came up with an agreement, and this ended up in the directive at European level. So we basically prepared the ground for the legislative framework. The key point here is it's not only temporary workers. Nowadays, we are on a slippery slope with remote work, with AI, with platforms to the 19th century, if not even the 18th century. It is a situation where actually the concept of employees, of workers who have rights, is being destroyed simply for the fact because with remote work, with platforms, you try to loosen the work relationship, the employment relationship between employer and worker. Ideally, for many of them, Amazon included, platforms included, they are all contractors who are living on their own and working from home. So we are going back to, in Germany, there is a famous play, The Weavers, where people are sitting in very bad situations at home, working there, and they just sell their products, little products, and we see this already with the Mechanical Turk in Amazon, where it's small pieces you're doing, and you basically have to fight for each second of your work over and over again.
Now, what about minimum wage? I think sometimes that's a kind of a delicate issue for trade unions, or is it not?
No, it's not a delicate issue for trade unions at all. I mean, we want minimum wages, and one of the key points of trade unions is minimum wages. But the key point is, and there I come back to collective bargaining and the European social pillar, the best way to get fair wages, minimum wages included, is through collective bargaining. And there we have the problem in Europe, and we need to do something. And one of the issues what we need to do, and I come up with three actually. The first one is we need to support capacity building in Europe. You all know how difficult the situation is in Central and Eastern Europe. We have to build social dialogue, collective bargaining there. And that means also for the European Union to put money into it. And not only via the member states, but using the European social partners we have here. And when I look at my organization at Uni Europa, we have 30 colleagues now working together with our unions in Central and Eastern Europe to build capacity for social partners to build collective bargaining. And we have successes. One example is Romania, where we managed in the finance sector to get sectoral social bargaining, sectoral collective bargaining back. A second point is, just a couple of days ago, on the 14th, in Spain, the law was changed that could sentence trade unionists to prison for engaging in industrial relations. What we rather need is criminalizing activities at European level by companies that do union busting, wage theft, and social dialogue, and social dumping, The third point, and that is most importantly, the EU should go for the lowest hanging fruit and the sharpest weapon public authorities have to promote collective bargaining. And that is public procurement. In public procurement, we have 14% of GDP, 2 trillion euros per year. Last month, 100 European trade union leaders sent an open letter to von der Leyen with a simple request: change EU public procurement rules to provide a European framework that is conducive to achieve this end. No public contracts for companies without collective agreement. Next week, we have our Congress, and we will put forward with our members the same demand. And what I'm really looking for Porto, that there is actually a clear forward move by the political parties in Europe, by the institutions, to bring public procurement changes on the way so that we really use this strong weapon.
Thanks very much, Oliver. So hang on, and Agnes, on public procurement, that seems to be support what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, or perhaps the other way around. I support what Oliver is saying. I think it's low-hanging fruit, and it's our public money. So why shouldn't we ask?
Tie a string to it.
I think it's a logical way forward. So I support the actions of all of us organization. I think it's high time to make some progress in this sense. Yes.
That's perhaps worth a hashtag EU Social Summit 21 there, that comment there. Let's move to Christian Bragason, General Secretary of the European Federation of Food, Agriculture and Tourism Trade Unions, that's EFAT. That's 2.6 million workers in 120 trade unions across 38 European countries. Includes temporary, platform, seasonal and 0 hours contracts. So obviously very tough issues to deal with during that social summit. Christian, I mean, you've argued that if you don't have a social Europe, you don't have any future EU, right?
Clearly, I mean, this is it's basic for us that if we don't really kind of like start to really focus on the people of Europe, the workers, the people that provide us with the tax income, but also kind of like provide us with all the goods that are that we are enjoying as a European citizens, we are not really creating a Europe that will serve the citizens. So that's what we need to focus on. We need to we need a social Europe. Without a social Europe, we can totally forget the EU. I mean, the social pillar is a really good step, but we still think that the action plan that has been promoted now has a lot of shortcomings and it's not really going far enough. There is a lot of things that needs to be addressed. Many types of workers will not be protected through the initiatives that the Commission has already put forward, even though I must admit this Commission that is in place at the moment has put in a lot of great initiatives, really trying to acknowledge some of the shortcomings that have been the problem of the EU in the past, really trying to change something. I must say, people like Agnes and many other people in the Social Democratic Party are doing an excellent job, but we need to push forward. We need to really have a more progress in order to create a more social Europe for workers.
Okay, so you welcome what they've done so far, but you still want new binding and effective instruments. What specifically do you want to see?
I mean, clearly, I mean, like as I said, and as you explained before, I mean, we represent quite a lot of precarious workers in really difficult sectors. We represent workers in agriculture. We represent workers, domestic workers, workers in hospitality sector, meat sector. You already talked about some of those issues before here. And it's clear that our positions are something that we need to we need to push forward with some of those issues. I mean, just allow me to tell you a story. I mean, like few years ago, I was invited to Italy by some of our affiliates to come and observe the situation among farm workers in Italy. And this is not an Italian problem. This is a problem that exists all over Europe. We visited the tomato harvesting fields in Foggia, where we visited and were able to talk to workers from various regions, both within Europe, but also outside of Europe. documented workers and undocumented workers. I mean, it was terrible to see the situation that those workers were in. The total lack of working conditions, poor pay, well below minimum wages. I mean, we're talking about kind of setting minimum wages in Europe. I mean, those workers were not even paid half the minimum wages that they were entitled to. There were no labor inspectors in place.
Yeah.
The places where the housing that they were living in, I mean, it's like during the pandemic, it's clear that those workers have been really, really crowded accommodation. They spread the virus easily. They cannot do social distancing. We are asking them to kind of like do social distancing, but it's not possible.
Right, and so as we talked about public procurement, tying strings to public procurement, and as Agnes said, also with the common agricultural policy, tie strings to that to ensure. That's what you'd like to see too, right?
Yeah, this is one of our main demands that we have today. And we are in the middle of the negotiation, the trialogue negotiation on the future of CAP are ongoing at the moment. And I would like to thank the Social Democratic Party in the Parliament, the European Parliament, but also kind of like people like Agnes, Maria Neukor, for their support here, because we are asking for a social conditionality here. We would like to make sure it's actually something that we can easily, with a very simple mechanism, force workers' right to kind of like being put in place. I mean, like it's we should not be giving money to employers, farmers, whoever that cannot respect workers' right. Today, we do not give money to workers, to farmers that do not respect the animal welfare right or environmental rights.
Right.
But workers' rights are totally disregarded when it comes to the common agriculture policy.
Right. That's an interesting point. Quickly on tourism.
Yeah.
You'd like to see more to do to revive the sector and create more jobs and reskilling and upskilling. Can you tell us about that? What you would like to see the Porto summit do in that regard?
Tourism is clearly the sector that has been most hard hit by the pandemic. We see around 6.5 up to 10 million workers either out of jobs, unemployed, or on some kind of job retention schemes today. And it's clear that we need to rethink tourism as well, because, I mean, when we relaunch, I want to be frank, we need to kind of support the sector. The sector needs support by all the member states, by the European Union. They need financial support, policy support, and so on. But we do not want the same kind of tourism as we had before. The sector had prevalence of temporary works, zero-hour contracts, all kinds of those really precarious working conditions that were terrible for our members all across Europe. And this is something that we need to change. We need to create quality jobs based on upskilling. We need to kind of like invest in training, education. We need to put focus on the workers and make decent working conditions in the sector with good contracts and not those day labor type of works as the past has had.
Okay, Christian, hang on. Let me, thanks very much. I want to move to our last speaker in the panel. And before I do, please do send in more of your questions. They are coming in. I'd like to get to them as quickly as I can after we get some initial comments from Thea Jark, who is president of the European Trade Union Confederation, ETUC Youth Committee. Your youth committee made a very interesting report on the future of work. I thought that was very interesting, Thea. About how many youth are in the gig economy, and there have to be new rights related to digitalization and lifelong learning, rights for trainees, interns, a youth guarantee. Can you hit on some of those and what you would like to see the summit in Porto do?
So yeah, first, what we expect is, of course, to acknowledge that young people are facing very difficult situation at the labor market right now. So the European youth are amongst those who were the most severely affected by the pandemic. And what we can see is that 1 in 6 young people lost their job because of the economic consequences of the COVID-19. And for example, in September 2020, the youth unemployment rate in EU was 17.1%. In some of the countries, even above 40%, such as in Spain.
Youth unemployment has always been a problem, hasn't it? I mean, it's always been terribly high.
Yes, indeed, but it's exactly because of lack of the appropriate policies. We cannot just accept that the youth unemployment is always higher and just do nothing about it.
Right.
And you have mentioned the youth guarantee. It's a scheme that we know for years now, but it's still not delivering. Why? Because it's prolonging the precariousness of young people.
Because the youth guarantee, if I recall, is you should be guaranteed some kind of job placement within 4 months after you leave school or lose a job, right?
Indeed. The European Commission, within the Youth Guarantee, it's encouraging all of the member states to develop measures that are going to provide a quality offer for young people who are unemployed within 4 months. So either we're talking about employment, apprenticeships, internships, paid internships, of course, or continued education. And what we have found out are that those offers are very low quality offers and that they are only providing short-term solutions, that many times young people were replacing the need for regular employees and they were used as a cheap labor.
If there were one thing you would like to see come out of Porto, would that be it? A binding, make the youth guarantee binding.
Make the youth guarantee binding, but not any kind of youth guarantee, but the youth guarantee with a quality standard, what is considered as quality offer, what is considered as quality job. And we have developed those standards and we have submitted it to the European Commission, to the member states, and we accept that they are going to adopt it and implement it in the future policies, also in the European Pillar of Social Rights. Because we cannot just accept that young people should have lower standards at the labor market, that young people are trapped in precarious work forms. We cannot be satisfied that any kind of job is better than no job. This is definitely not the case. And we have to also look at the funding. We're talking about the European funding. It's our money, it's public investment. And with the public investment, we cannot finance low quality jobs. Young people, we simply have enough of it. And we want some strict criteria for the employers and, of course, for the governments as well. Especially, of course, acknowledging that this money, it's also connected with the loans. This money, part of it, it's coming through the loans. And we're asking ourselves, who is going to pay those loans? It's going to be the young generation. And as I said, like we demand something more binding, something more quality for young people.
Thea, your Future of Work report calls for new rights related to digitalization, such as the right to disconnect. Can you say more about that? I mean, also, I have in mind that millennials and other youth would like to have that flexibility as digital nomads, but I guess it has to be managed so that people aren't worked to death either, right?
Yes, indeed. Flexibility, in one hand, it's very important for young people. But on the other side, whenever we do a research and we ask young people, what do you value the most? Is it security and the fact that you know that you're going to have a stable employment with regular working hours and regular conditions? Or is it flexibility? Young people still choose stability and the fact that they can predict that they're going to be able to pay their bills next month. So the flexibility can only work if it's really working for workers, not only for the employers, meaning because the employers, we know that they look at the flexibility in a way that they can just get rid of young people from one day to another. So young people do not want this kind of flexibility. So of course the right to disconnect, it's very important, especially in precarious or atypical forms of employment where there are no regulations, where we see young people working on weekends, on holidays, when there is no rest period, when there are no paid sick leaves, no holidays, and so on and so forward. But yeah, as I said, young people value stability as well. And we also have to look look at the platform work that has been mentioned already and the gig economy that it's popping up more and more. And again, we see that it's mostly young people working in those kind of gig economy sectors. And here, as a trade unionist, we are proposing a legislative directive on the platform work, where the rights of the workers would be clearly defined as the rights of the workers, not the rights of the self-employed. And if there is a self-employment, it's up to the employer to prove that, not to the workers.
Yeah. Taya, thanks a lot. Stay on, please. Agnes, these actually the demands of youth are pretty much the demands of any age, aren't they?
And it's also clear that you're right, but it's also clear that they paid a high price during this COVID crisis.
Indeed, yeah.
And Per was in the start of this round talking about support programs which were funded for workers. And I think he's right in his plea of continuation of these programs. But it's also true that those workers covered are mostly the workers with fixed contracts and stable salaries. So if, as a young person, you have an unstable, flexible, atypical contract, in most of the member states, the support programs were not there for you. So I think these are clear demands.
To be established on a European level, yeah.
And therefore, sorry to repeat myself, but I think also there we need a threshold of decency. I think you cannot treat young people like this and expect them to look happily at the future. I think the COVID crisis worked as a kind of a looking glass. It's clear where the problems are. It's clear that young people, these nomads, perhaps enjoyed flexibility a little bit, but they also at a high cost in a crisis as this. So I think I recognize their demands. And I think we should say it's our common demands because Europe needs to provide a future for all its citizens, also for the young people.
Right, absolutely. I have a number of questions here I'd like to get to before we wrap up this panel, and I hear something here from Juan Carlos on Facebook. The pandemic demonstrated how dependent we were on factories in China. Would it be essential to get these factories back? Who would like to comment on that? Any of the union leaders, perhaps? Oliver, would you like to comment on that? Or, yeah, anybody?
Chris, I mean, for me, it's a bit difficult. I mean, since I'm not organizing manufacturing.
For us, it's clear, like we've seen the importance of local production during the COVID pandemic. I mean, like just look at the all of the food production. I mean, like there was a major challenges to the food production in Europe during this crisis, but the workers really stepped up, and the companies as well. I mean, give them credit for that as well. They managed to kind of like change a lot of their production lines, managed to really kind of like provide Europe with food. I mean, that we've been too reliant on buying cheap food from various parts of the world where labor conditions, unfortunately, are too poor. We need to, I wouldn't necessarily say that we just have to move everything to Europe, but at the same time, we must make sure that when we use our trade agreements in the future, that we put kind of like a greater demands on the production that is made abroad, that they follow the same kind of standards that we have here in Europe. I mean, that's my say. I mean, like, but at the same time, I still believe that we need to be more self-reliant on our production here in Europe.
Okay. All right. I'm going to move to the next question unless there's any other comment. Here's another question. Is fiscal dumping interfering in employment in the European Union? Is fiscal dumping interfering in employment in the European Union? Can I pitch that to Barbara? Barbara Gelsenberger, expert on job quality, European Foundation for Improving Living and Working Conditions. Barbara, are you there? Yeah.
I am trying to think how to reply to that question. Fiscal dumping in employment in Europe. I mean, I think one prerequisite for the overall goal of creating sufficient employment, but making this good employment, is a level playing field in Europe. So that, by definition, means any form of dumping, fiscal dumping, social dumping, etc., should not be possible within the boundaries of the European Union. So that, I think, is a prerequisite for achieving this goal of more, but at the same time, high quality jobs. So that would be my rather general answer to that question.
Okay. Can I go to Per Hilmerson, Deputy Secretary General of the General Secretary of ETUC. Per, what's your position on that?
I can totally agree to this. I mean, we have quite a big problem in Europe with tax avoidance and tax planning, and also on the company tax base and tax level. So there's a need for more EU action, harmonized actions. We don't base our competition on the internal market on these issues, such as which is the same with working conditions as well. That's why we need binding measures at the EU level. Coming back to the previous question on China, I think the COVID crisis has shown how important it is to have in Europe strong and diversified industrial base value chains in Europe productions. I totally agree with Christian there that we need perhaps not take everything to Europe, but we need to build it up again and really have a look what is of strategic importance for us to have our own production, of course, but also at the same time keeping an open and fair trade with the rest.
Well, yeah, there are many who talk about the reindustrialization, the need to reindustrialize Europe, right?
Indeed, and this is, I mean, I think, yeah, it's clear that we are too reliant on the third country, so to speak. So we need to draw the lessons and look at what we need in terms of production on not only vaccines but industrial production in general.
Thea, can I turn to you again? In your Future of Work report, there's one other aspect I wanted to ask you about migrants. You say that or your report says, there should be better systems in place to recognize the acquired skills and qualifications of migrants. Can you talk about that? And should that be an issue at the summit?
Yes, indeed. I think we should look at all of the vulnerable groups at the labor market, and migrants for sure are some of them. We have to recognize that we are talking about very skilled generation. In general, new generation, young people are the most educated generation that we have ever seen. And still, we are being heard that there is a mismatch of skills required at the labor market. And many times, especially for the migrants, for the refugees coming to EU, there are no proper systems in place that would actually recognize their skills and education that they have acquired. So we believe that, here there is many times there's not so much about the problem of young people not having the necessary skills for entering the labor market. It's just the fact that there are no jobs. There are no quality jobs. This is why we're also calling.
Go ahead. Sorry, that's all right.
Yeah, this is why we're also calling for more public investment into the jobs. And maybe looking at the previous questions, like if the COVID crisis revealed that we are dependent on China, I would say that it also revealed that we are dependent on the essential workers, and those were not only, people in the healthcare, but also kindergarten teachers and teachers, or delivery riders who are delivering food. So here I believe that, with the proper investments in creating new jobs, and here let's not forget there is also potential of creating new green jobs, we would actually allow young people to enter the labor market and, show that they are already educated and ready, to take the jobs.
And how to fight the brain drain, youth drain from different countries within the EU. How should we fight that, and how could that be addressed at the Social Summit?
Yeah, exactly, by providing quality jobs in all of the countries. So it means creating more equality among the countries. And this is, again, related to the dumping. Of course, there is a fiscal dumping in Europe that we still see. There is a social dumping. Young people from countries that have been hit not only by the current crisis, but also by the previous financial and economic crisis, young people are still leaving those countries because simply they do not have opportunities to find a job, or because salaries are so low in their countries, or because there is not appropriate housing system that would allow young people to become independent, move out from their parents' place, and rent
it's all kind
or
of
buy an
interlinked.
apartment.
Yeah.
So here it has to be a holistic approach towards developing all of those policies and providing some kind of quality solutions for young people where they are. Do not get me wrong, of course, mobility is something good, but only if it's not forced mobility.
Yeah, indeed. I think I'd like to wrap up this panel with some final comments from Elisabetta. Are you still there, Elisabetta, with us? That's great.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm particularly happy of having listened to all our panelists, because the panel was indeed very interesting and stimulating. First of all, I would like to say that, of course, to have to give an answer to the problem of jobs quality is not an easy task. So we have to recognize it, because the quality of jobs is a multidimensional, concept, as Barbara has very well highlighted. And of course, it's very difficult to have all the quality conditions there. And also there are some contradictions that we have to take into account, and that our panelists have, somehow highlighted. For instance, the need for collective action in order to strengthen the voice and the representation of precarious workers. But on the other side, we have to take into account that many of these jobs are sort of individual, so very different one from the other. And so it is very difficult in the gig economy, to build up a collective action for these workers. And of course, it is a task that we have to face, of course. Then another contradiction is between, the adaptation of workers also in the digital process, because as Barbara told us, we have seen that many workers seem to like remote working, at least for a percentage of their time.
Right.
On the other side, they ask for no pressure, no overload, and of course for stability in some other parts of their working times.
And the right to disconnect.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So it is not easy to balance all these categories. And also we have a sectorial, dimension. That is, there are sectors like tourism and agriculture, like Christian told us, in which precariousness is really a dramatic problem. I'm very sorry that he quoted the example of Italy, but I know that that these bad conditions of workers are unfortunately spread out in many European countries. And we have a generational dimension, of course. So the young generation is suffering a lot, and I think that a binding and a good quality youth guarantee, as Thea told us, would be a good idea. So, but finally, I also think that we have to be proud of what the European Union has been able to do, because at the end of the day, we have on the plate a giant mobilization of resources never seen in the history of the European integration. So if you sum up the recovery fund, the budget of the European Union and some other programs, we have a total amount of 2,400 billion euros. So it is the time where we can distribute, we can build up new innovative policies, And I was quite impressed because in the panel we never spoke about economics, the euro, austerity. We really spoke about the social dimension of Europe, jobs, equality, resources to be distributed. So I think that we have a giant opportunity, and I hope that we will be, as politicians, able to exploit it and to do a good job. So thank you to everyone. It was really incredibly interesting.
Thank you very much, Elisabetta. Grazie mille. A couple of a quick comment from Per Hilmersson as well, wrapping things up from the European Trade Union Confederation. Per, do you think that this summit can? How optimistic are you, or pessimistic, that that this summit can really help to help workers have a quality employment, all workers?
Well, I prefer to be realistic than rather than optimistic or pessimistic. I think EU leaders have realized that we cannot survive this crisis or deal with this crisis as we did a decade ago with the financial crisis, with austerity measures and no regard to social issues. That time is over. So in that sense, I'm optimistic that they will sign up to the action plan to implement the social pillar. But then we really need a proper follow-up. Agnes talked about binding objectives. I mean, that's, I think, needed to make them really not just leave Porto and go home and forget all about it. So we need a follow-up. It's not over on the 8th of May. We need to follow up the day after already to make sure that they do all these things. And also as a wrap-up, of course, I'm a trade unionist, and in this panel there have been my colleagues, and I just want to reiterate what Oliver said, and that's how important it is with collective bargaining, that social partners are involved in the design and implementation of reforms and policies. Because as previous crises have shown, again, the financial crisis, countries with strong social dialogue systems, they manage economic shocks and difficulties better than others, and it helps to create more inclusive and sustainable growth. And also during this pandemic, we have seen how emergency measures are more effective if they are implemented and adopted by or together with social partners. So the EU needs to promote collective bargaining and support social partners in countries where they are weak, or capacity building as it's called. And it's also about securing our rights, for instance, through public procurement, because as Agnes said, we are talking about public money. And then we need conditions on how they are used, and we should introduce social conditionality, for instance, on EU financing of the common agriculture policy, which both Agnes and Christian mentioned. So, and these I hope we can sign up to in Porto as well, to support social dialogue and collective bargaining.
I guess you can add to that the green transition. You have to have everybody on board, and you have to make sure that there is dialogue to make it work, so you don't have more yellow vests, right?
Indeed, we call it just transition.
Just transition.
Yeah, so that's key. And I think we, as social partners, as trade unions especially, can try to secure this just transition because we're the closest to the ground, to our members. Otherwise, there will be more yellow vests. There will be more backs turned to the EU and more resentment, basically. So that's also something that the EU leaders need to take into account in Porto.
Per Hilmersson of ETUC, thank you very much. Thanks so much. Let's go and close this, our final comments, with a few speakers, starting with Helen Fritzon, who is the S&D Vice President, S&D member of the Employment and Social Affairs Committee. Your conclusions and your presentation of the S&D's declaration on the 2030 Porto Agenda for Sustainable Wellbeing. This is launching and unveiling this declaration. Can you talk about that, please, Helen?
Thank you so much, Chris. And I am here. I'm with you from Sweden, and I will say thanks to all the speakers. I feel so inspired in the discussion. So good evening, everyone. As Vice President for the S&D Group, I'm happy and grateful for having the opportunity to say a few words in this concluding session. As Agnes spoke about, since long time, our group and our political family, we have pushed for a strong social Europe, including high quality jobs, social justice and inclusion for all. I think we can be proud of what we have achieved so far. Our achievements have really shaped the European social model of today. But however, in many ways, we are still suffering from the crisis from 10 years ago. And the current COVID-19 pandemic is also having a huge impact. So this is the reason why we welcome the action plan on the implementation of the social pillar. This is also the reason why the upcoming Porto Social Summit is so important. And finally, this is also the reason why we need an ambitious and progressive sustainable development agenda for the future. With this conference today, we also adopt a joint declaration, the 2030 Porto Agenda for Sustainable Wellbeing Declaration. This declaration will be sent to the Commission, to the Council and the Portuguese presidency ahead of the social summit. But I will also underline that it will be open for endorsement by social partners and civil society organizations. This message is clear. With real political will, if we make the right political choices, then we can push the European Union to be an engine of solidarity and well-being of people. Some tools are already available to achieve this. We have the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, the European Pillar of Social Rights, the Green New Deal, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and of course, now the Gender Equality Strategy. But now is the time for integrating them all. By doing this, we can create a new European system of sustainable well-being and inclusive governance, in which different strands of European Union macroeconomic, environmental and social governance are integrated into a single structure. But we need more, and this is why we also call for clear reforms by integration of a social progress protocol in the treaties, protecting social rights at the same level as economic freedom in the single market. In order to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, we also need to adopt a Sustainable Development and Social Progress Pact, making social and sustainable targets mandatory. I think we also need a clear social objectives to be reached by 2030, which will be reflected in the priorities and policies of the European Union and at all levels of governance in each of its member states. For me, this includes the elimination of in-work poverty, the elimination of work-related deaths and the reduction of work-related illnesses, minimum income schemes to cover everyone in need, and the child guarantee to cover all children in need, and access to decent housing for all, and the elimination of the gender pay gap. We believe in our S&D group that the conclusions of the social summit should maintain this level of ambition. And we also need commitments and initiatives supporting these objectives. People of Europe expect nothing less. And let's be clear, if we fail to deliver on a better life for many people, people will turn their back on us and our European project. We therefore appeal to the member states and the Commission to show ambition. we call upon them to enact ambitious and progressive Porto agenda. And now, in these times of crisis, only a focus on Europe's integrated social, environmental and economic project, as established in the treaties, will guarantee its future success. So I can tell you, for 4 years ago, I was a minister in the Swedish government when the summit in Gothenburg took place. And of course, I'm very happy to now be a part of the journey to the Porto summit, where we can fulfill our ambitions and ensure that the European Union will live up to a strong social Europe. So thank you so much, and let's work together, and thank you for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen. Look forward to see you in Porto. Let's move quickly to Oliver Rübke, President of the Workers' Group in the European Economic and Social Committee, EESC. You are also a former head of office of the Austrian Trade Union Federation. We had a lot of input from different trade union leaders during the second panel, especially. If you can wrap up a bit, and to note that this European Economic and Social Committee is a consultative body that includes trade unions, businesses, and others that would be important in mobilizing whatever the social summit decides. That when after there's legislation, you help to show on the ground and push on the ground whatever's decided there. So you would play a very important role after any decision is made, right?
Yes, thank you, Chris, and good afternoon to everybody. Yeah, you're right, and I saw just Agnes, and we work very closely with Agnes and the other friends in the European Parliament, with the progressive forces in the European Parliament, and I think we tried to work together, and also as workers' group here in the committee, where we bring together more than 100 trade unionists across Europe. We try to push for this progressive agenda, and to be honest, I think we were quite successful at the moment, because I think we are witnessing at the moment really a shift of paradigm at the moment. I mean, the question is not anymore if Europe should play any role in social policy. The question is now what kind of role it should be. This is really already a progress, I would say. And if we look into the past, then we could see that the EU has made too little progress towards its aim of raising the quality of employment over the last decade. And in some cases, in the case of Greece, for example, even gone backwards. A new ETUC decent work index has found. So I think it's really time to action, and I can continue where just Helen has finished with the European Pillar of Social Rights. I think this was really a milestone with decisive support from the Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven. And I think we agreed already at the time being that this pillar is not just a compass, but it must be turned into concrete policies. European.
You want to see a social contract, something on the level of a social rule book, as Madame von der Leyen has suggested, right?
Exactly. I think citizens and working people would not understand such a display of principles if they do not come accompanied by tangible effects. And therefore, we very much welcome this initiative for an action plan. We are not happy with all the parts of the action plan. We could have imagined that it should have been much more ambitious, but I think it is a very good starting point. And moreover, I welcome also the initiative and the strong commitment of the Portuguese presidency to put the social recovery in the heart and in the center of their presidency. I mean, this is not something usual, and we appreciate this very much. And I expect the Porto summit that there we have a high-level commitment of stakeholders, of member states, of social partners, political forces, and also of our body here, of the advisory committee, which is the ESC, a strong commitment to implement this social pillar through concrete actions. I think this
how much is addressing platform work important to you, especially in this COVID crisis? It's quite topical now, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think we all agree. We can see now, in a nutshell, actually, the development of the last years. We can see them in a nutshell now during the pandemic. So, of course, we need to regulate it. And I'm happy and I welcome that there are now initiatives which will be launched. And we need a regulation. We need more rights for platform workers. We can see that in more and more member states, they are granted with more rights. And I think this has to be reflected also at European level, that we have to give them more rights, especially when it comes to collective bargaining. It was said many times, but once again, collective bargaining, social dialogue must be in the center of this implementation process and of this social upward convergence, I would say.
Oliver Röpke, President of the Workers' Group in the EESC, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks, Oliver. Vielen Dank. Let me move to our final speaker, Anna Karjalainen, Finnish representative of the group of the Party of European Socialists, PES group, in the European Committee of the Regions. That's another consultative, COR is another consultative body. With the same idea that you got to have the regions behind you when you want to carry out some kind of legislation. You're a rapporteur in COR on the implementation of the European Pillar on Social Rights from a local and regional perspective. And you are in the town of Kerava in Finland. That's just out of Helsinki. I looked on the map. And you've been very much in local politics on the city council, board of energy at Kerava. So you can really talk about on the ground how we have to approach this, what the social summit should be considering as far as local government.
Good evening. It's a great honor to close this conference on behalf of the PES group in the European Committee of the Regions, the institution that makes sure that cities and regions can make their voice heard in the European Union. As you mentioned, I'm a chair of the Commission for the Social Policy, Education and Employment, and currently I'm a rapporteur on the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights. We know well, as local and regional authorities, that the biggest challenge in politics today is to be able to close to our citizens and provide concrete answers to their current problems for a better future. You mentioned that I'm a city council in the city of Kerava, and right now I'm sitting in the city hall of my hometown. We have a budget negotiation with the political groups. This corona has caused final problems. And we socialists, we don't want to cut budget or services. Wellbeing is directly linked with proximity to citizens and delivery of public services. Localizing well-being priorities is necessary in order to design and implement effective measures to respond to specific local needs. But it's also clear that measures for the well-being of citizens are best implemented when local and regional authorities are well equipped to deliver. We therefore need effective decentralization of public services and the earmarking adequate financing resources to ensure investments in social, green and digital infrastructures. Regions and cities are key areas in the implementation of economic change, ecological transition and social innovation, so that no places and no people are left behind. It is our responsibility to guarantee affordable public services also in rural areas, in areas affected by industrial transition and the areas with the severe and permanent natural or demographic handicaps. We do not follow the logic of profit. We do not localize or delocalize services according to pure economic interest. Our objective is to tackle inequalities. We fight for social, economic, territorial, and digital cohesion. We should all work with the overall aim to reduce existing deep territorial disparities. This is absolutely necessary for the attainment of the three key goals of the European Pillar of Social Rights. First, equal opportunities and access to the labour market, then fair working conditions and social protection and inclusion. The pandemic has made our work more difficult, but we need to take this as an opportunity to build back better our communities and our content as a whole. But to combat social injustice, build resilience to crises and help people get through the green and digital transitions, the European Pillar of Social Rights must become part of the DNA of the European Union. It is high time to put into the practice in the coordinated manner throughout the Union, with the full involvement of all levels of governance from the European to local. In order to be effective, the implementation of the European Pillar of Social Rights must be prioritized in the framework of the European semester. Only a better coordination of economic and social policies between the European and national level of government in the framework of the European semester will ensure that the recovery from the current crisis is truly inclusive and addresses social exclusion, poverty, and inequality.
Anna, a quick final comment, because we've run out of time. I think very important that you made those points that it's all about well-being, well-being for jobs, for housing, for youth, for children. How optimistic are you that we can achieve something during this summit?
I'm quite positive that if we together to decide to do something, and these three main goals, if we achieve them, I'm very positive that the result and the future of the citizens of the European will be better.
Thank you. Anna Karjalainen, Finnish representative for the group of the PES group in the Committee of the Regions. Thank you very much, and thanks to all of the speakers. Maybe a final word from Agnes, who's right next to me. Jongerius?
No, we have 2 weeks until Porto.
The time is ticking, right?
Time is ticking. Ambitions are high.
Yeah.
Dreams are also high.
It's good to be optimistic. It's good to,
It's
right?
good to be optimistic,
Yeah.
because I think we need progress for young people, for old people, for workers, for retired person. There are a lot of policies ideas on the table.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think there is a lot of commitment in our family, in our family and friends. So let's make good use of the time until Porto. And someone said it earlier. It's of course not the end. Huh? It's
right.
not after 8th of May. We're never going to talk about social policies again.
Right. That's it's the next step. That's all.
It's the next step,
right.
and here we can make progress, which is very important. So,
yeah.
Very motivated, and thanks for everyone who contributed to this.
Thanks to all, and thanks to all of you watching, and for all the questions that you sent in. Fantastic. We hope to do that again very soon. Hope to see some of you in Porto for the social summit. And we'll have another online event over there, in fact. So I look forward to seeing you then. So, and anything you heard during this conference, these talks, please do send it out on #EU Social Summit 21. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.